I had always been drawn to abandoned places, but Blackwood Asylum was different. Its crumbling walls and shattered windows loomed like a corpse of a forgotten era, whispering secrets only the wind could hear. I shouldn't have gone inside. The air was thick with decay as I wandered through empty halls, my flashlight casting flickering beams over rusted gurneys and overturned chairs. The silence was suffocating until I heard it, a door creaking open. I turned sharply. At the end of the corridor, where there had been only a blank wall before, now stood a door. It was pristine. Unlike the rest of the asylum, its wood smooth, its brass handle gleaming as if untouched by time. I didn't remember seeing it on the blueprints. My breath hitched as I reached out and turned the knob. The door swung open without resistance, revealing a room frozen in time. An old office, candlelit and pristine. Papers lay neatly stacked on the desk. A cup of tea sat steaming, as if someone had just left. The air smelled of ink and lavender, not the mildew and rot of the asylum. I stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind me. Panic gripped my chest as I spun around. The handle wouldn't budge. My flashlight flickered, and in its dying beam, I saw them. Shadows, dozens of them, standing along the walls. Still. Silent. Watching. Then a whisper. "Sit." The chair behind the desk scraped against the floor. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, my body moved on its own. I sat. My hands rested on the desk. The papers before me shifted, their words twisting into something else. A name. My name. The ink bled, forming new words beneath it. "Welcome back, Doctor." My blood ran cold. The shadows pressed closer, their whispers rising, filling my ears, my mind, my soul. I tried to stand, to scream, but I couldn't remember why. A knock echoed from the other side of the door. Someone was outside. Someone just like me. And as the handle turned, I realized the truth. I hadn't found the forgotten room. I had never left. The door creaked open. A man stood in the doorway, his face pale with the same fear I had once felt. His flashlight trembled in his grip as he stepped inside, eyes scanning the room, the desk, the chair, me. I tried to speak, to warn him, but my lips didn't move. My body remained frozen, hands resting on the desk, fingers gripping the papers that now bore his name. The shadows whispered excitedly. They had been waiting. "Please," the man stammered, taking a step back. I don't belong here." Neither had I. But the moment he crossed the threshold, I remembered. The way I had entered years, no moments ago. The way the chair had pulled me in. The way my mind had emptied, my past dissolving like ink in water, replaced by the only truth that mattered. I was the doctor. And now he was me. The whispers grew louder, voices overlapping, a rising chorus of hollow welcomes. The shadows shifted, their elongated forms stretching toward him. The candlelight flickered, and I felt it, the transfer. The weight of the chair lifted from my soul. The paralysis loosened its grip. I could stand. I could move. I was free. The man gasped as the realization hit him. His body went rigid. His breath quickened. His hands trembled over the desk. His eyes, wide with horror, locked onto mine. No, please. But the door was already closing. The last thing I saw before stepping into the darkened corridor was his reflection in the window behind the desk. He didn't look like himself anymore. He looked like me. The door sealed with a final, echoing click. The whispers fell silent. And as I walked away, the asylum's walls seemed just a little less decayed. A little less empty. Somewhere behind me, the candlelight burned on, and the forgotten room waited for its next visitor. As I stepped into the hallway, a strange sensation crawled beneath my skin, like something peeling away, unraveling. I looked down. My hands, they weren't mine. The fingers were too long, the nails cracked and darkened. My breath hitched. I turned toward a shattered window, desperate to see my reflection. The face staring back wasn't the one I remembered. It was older, hollow, twisted. Something inside me snapped. Memories rushed in, memories that didn't belong to me. Patience screaming. The echo of my own voice, deep and commanding. A scalpel in my hand. A door closing. "Welcome back, Doctor." The words slithered through my mind, but they weren't from the shadows. They were from me. My knees buckled as my laughter, echoed through the empty halls. The asylum knew. The room had never been forgotten. I had simply forgotten myself. And now, somewhere inside, another lost soul was sitting at the desk, staring at his name, feeling his own past slip away. The asylum always needed a doctor, and I had just been promoted. The laughter echoed in my skull, twisting into something that wasn't mine. It belonged to the walls, the shadows, the whispers. It belonged to the asylum. I staggered forward, my breath ragged, my thoughts unraveling like old film. I had to get out. I had to find a way, before I forgot everything. The halls stretched endlessly, twisting into unfamiliar corridors. My footsteps grew heavier. The air thickened, pressing against me like unseen hands. Doors lined the passage, each identical, each locked. But behind them, I heard them. Voices. Crying. Begging. And then something else. A dragging sound. Slow. Wet. Approaching. I turned a corner and froze. A figure stood at the end of the hall. It was tall, wrapped in tattered doctor's robes, its face hidden beneath a rotting surgical mask. But its hands, long, skeletal fingers clutching rusted medical tools, trembled with anticipation. It raised its head, and I saw what lay beneath the mask. My own face. Decayed. Hollow. Grinning. "Time for your rounds, doctor." The thing lunged. I ran, my vision blurring, my mind fracturing. The hall twisted and coiled around me, the doors slamming open one by one. Pale hands reached out, grasping, pulling. Faces melted into empty voids, their mouths stretched in silent screams. I slammed into a door at the end of the corridor, unlocked. I stumbled inside, gasping. The forgotten room. The candle still burned. The chair was still waiting. And in front of the desk, a mirror stood. My reflection blinked at me, except it wasn't mine anymore. It was the man I had left behind, his eyes wide with horror, his lips moving soundlessly. I turned. The door was gone. The walls closed in. The whispers swelled into deafening shrieks. The chair pulled me down. The papers shuffled themselves. The ink twisted, forming new words. A new name. My next patient. I tried to scream, but it was already too late. Because I wasn't trapped anymore. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And the asylum always needed a doctor. I had always been drawn to old houses. Something about their crumbling walls and forgotten pasts fascinated me. So when I found an abandoned Victorian manor on the outskirts of town, I saw it not as a place of dread, but as an opportunity. It was perfect. Tall, Gothic spires, ivy-covered bricks, and a history steeped in mystery. The previous owners had vanished nearly a century ago, their fates unknown. No one in town dared step inside. That should have been my first warning. I moved in on a cold autumn evening. The house groaned as I crossed the threshold, a deep, wooden sigh that sent a shiver through me. Dust clung to the air, and an eerie silence filled the vast halls. As I explored, I noticed something peculiar. The house was fully furnished, as if frozen in time. A child's doll sat on a rocking chair, its glassy eyes watching me. A fireplace held the charred remains of a fire that should have long since turned to dust. And then I found the mirror. It was massive, covering almost an entire wall in the grand hall. Its frame was intricate, adorned with carvings of twisting vines and faces contorted in silent screams. The glass was strangely pristine, untouched by time. That night, the whispering began. At first, it was faint, a hushed conversation just beyond my hearing. I dismissed it as the wind slipping through the cracks in the old walls. But as the night deepened, so did the voices. "Help us!" I sat up in bed, my heart hammering. The words were clear, desperate, coming from beyond my closed bedroom door. Slowly, I stood and crept toward the sound. As I stepped into the hallway, the air turned frigid. My breath came out in visible puffs, my skin prickling with an unseen presence. The whispering led me downstairs, to the mirror. It was no longer reflecting the dimly lit hall. Instead, I saw something else entirely. A room, identical to the one I stood in, but wrong. The walls were darker, rotting. The chandelier hung at an unnatural angle, its crystals swaying without a breeze. And then I saw them, figures standing in the shadows, watching. One stepped forward. It was a man, or at least it had been. His skin was stretched tight over his bones, his eyes hollow pits. His mouth moved, but the words were not his. They came from behind me. "He's here." I spun around. The hall was empty. I turned back to the mirror, and my reflection had changed. The figure in the glass wore my clothes, had my face, but it wasn't me. Its eyes were sunken, its smile too wide. It raised a hand, pressing its palm against the glass. My breath caught in my throat as I felt a cold, skeletal touch on my shoulder. The last thing I saw before everything went black was my reflection stepping away, leaving me behind. Now I watch from the other side, screaming soundlessly as it lives my life. And no one can hear me. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The world beyond the glass looked the same. My house, my furniture, my body moving as if I was still in control. But I wasn't. I pounded against the mirror, but my fists made no sound. My voice, my desperate screams, were swallowed by an unnatural silence. Then my reflection, no, the thing that had taken my place, turned its head ever so slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Slowly, it smiled, lifting a hand in a mockery of a wave before stepping away from the mirror, disappearing into my life. I was trapped. The world inside the mirror was not a perfect reflection. It was rotting. The walls wept black streaks, the wooden floors groaned under unseen weight, and the air was thick, damp, wrong. Time did not move naturally here. The chandelier's light flickered erratically, casting elongated shadows that twitched as if they were alive. I wasn't alone. In the darkness, I saw them, other figures lurking just beyond my sight. Some stood frozen, staring at me with empty eye sockets. Others moved in unnatural jerks, crawling along the ceiling, their limbs bending in ways they shouldn't. A whisper slithered through the silence. Another one, another lost soul. I turned, my pulse hammering, but I saw nothing. Then a face emerged from the darkness, pale, stretched, its eyes black pits of endless void. "It took your place, didn't it?" The voice rasped, hollow and cold. I stumbled back. "What is this place?" I managed to croak. The thing smiled, a slow, jagged movement that stretched its lips far beyond what was humanly possible. The hollow waits for new guests. A cold dread settled into my bones. I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last. On the other side, time twisted in this forsaken place. I wandered endless halls that should not exist, opening doors that led to nothing but black voids, or, worse, back to where I started. I saw glimpses of my old life through the mirror, my body, now occupied by it, interacting with the world as if nothing had changed. Friends, family, strangers, they saw only me. But the longer I watched, the more I saw the truth. It wasn't perfect. At first, it mimicked me flawlessly. My speech, my mannerisms, even my habits. But then little things changed. My reflection, the thing now wearing my skin, would stop mid-conversation, head tilting as if listening to something no one else could hear. It would smile too widely, hold eye contact a fraction too long. People noticed. Their expressions would shift from casual to uneasy. Friends started to distance themselves. My mother called less often, her voice strained with something she couldn't explain. Then one night, I saw it do something that froze my blood. It stood before the mirror, staring directly at me. And for the first time since I had been trapped, it spoke, not to anyone in the real world, but to me. "You belong here now." Then it turned away and began searching for someone else. For its next guest. I knew, with a horror that sank deep into my soul, that I had to escape. But the hollow does not let its guests leave. And time is running out. I no longer know how long I've been trapped here. Days? Months? Years? Time in the hollow is twisted, an endless cycle of darkness and whispers. But tonight, something changed. The mirror flickered, not like before, not like a window into my stolen life, but like a doorway cracking open. For the first time, I saw something beyond the glass. A dimly lit room. A person. They stood before the mirror, staring at their own reflection, oblivious to the shadows creeping behind them. I watched in horror as the thing wearing my body stepped into view, placing a hand on their shoulder, its lips curling into that unnatural smile. I screamed, pounded on the glass. But they didn't hear me. The mirror flickered again, and just before the darkness swallowed me whole, I saw what lay beyond. 1,000 more mirrors, 1,000 more trapped souls, and 1,000 more waiting to take their place. I never believed in ghosts, until the night I moved into Blackwood Manor. The house had been abandoned for years, its towering silhouette a dark mark against the moonlit sky. The villagers whispered about the disappearances, the strange sounds, the flickering lights in empty rooms. But I was a skeptic, a man of logic. That was until the first night. I was unpacking when I heard it, a whisper. Soft, almost unintelligible. I froze. It came again, closer this time. My breath caught in my throat. "Leave." The voice was hollow, distant, but full of warning. I turned, expecting to see someone behind me. Nothing. The room was empty, yet the air felt thick, heavy with unseen eyes watching. Then the shadows moved. Not the way candlelight flickers, or how the wind makes curtains dance. No, these shadows crawled. They stretched along the walls, forming distorted figures with elongated fingers and hollow, gaping mouths. I stumbled back, my pulse pounding. A mirror stood in the corner of the room. In its reflection, I saw something I will never forget. A woman, her face pale as bone, eyes sunk in voids, mouth twisted in silent agony. She reached out toward me, her skeletal fingers pressing against the glass from inside. I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping in the cold night air. The next morning, I returned with daylight as my shield. The house stood as lifeless as before, yet something had changed. The mirror was shattered, a single message scrawled in the dust beneath it. You should have listened. As I stood there, staring at the broken mirror and the ominous message beneath it, a chilling realization crept over me. I had left the house, but something had followed. A cold breath slithered down my neck. My reflection in the shards of glass did not move in sync with me. Instead, it smiled. And then, in a voice that was now unmistakably close, it whispered, "You can never leave."